The conference room went dead silent when Gerald Hoffman announced my termination. 200 employees staring at me while I sat there like an idiot, my coffee still warm in my hands. 28 years with Great Lakes Industrial Systems, and this is how it ends. My name is William Patterson, but everyone calls me Bill. I'm 52, and up until that Monday morning, I was the senior IT director at Great Lakes. Been there since I was 24, fresh out of the Army with a computer science degree and big dreams about building something that mattered. And I did build something. Every server humming in that basement, every network connection spanning our 3 buildings, every security protocol keeping our data safe. All me. When I started in 1996, they had 4 computers and a fax machine. Now we're running a $150 million manufacturing operation on systems I designed and built from scratch. But apparently none of that mattered anymore. Effective immediately, Bill Patterson will be transitioning out of his role, Gerald said, not even looking at me. His voice had that corporate flatness that executives use when they're destroying lives. We're restructuring the IT department to bring in fresh perspectives and modern approaches to match our evolving business needs. Fresh perspectives. Right. What he meant was his 28-year-old son Mason was taking over, armed with nothing but an MBA from some fancy school and daddy's last name. The kid had been working there for exactly 6 months as IT strategy consultant, a made-up title that let him sit in on my meetings and ask questions that proved he couldn't tell a server from a space heater. I should have seen it coming. The sign started 3 months ago when Mason began showing up everywhere I went. Department head meetings I'd attended alone for years suddenly had this kid taking notes and making suggestions about digital transformation and cloud-first strategies. Then came Gerald's casual hallway conversations about updating our technology leadership and bringing in digital natives who understand modern paradigms. Digital natives. The kid probably learned about computers from Instagram stories. But the real kicker was last month when Gerald asked me to mentor Mason and help him understand our infrastructure legacy. Legacy. Like 28 years of bulletproof systems was some kind of museum piece. I played along because I needed this job. Sarah was finishing her master's degree at Ohio State, $40,000 a year in tuition and living expenses. Mike just started his internal medicine residency in Chicago, barely making $50,000 while working 80-hour weeks. My ex-wife Linda had made it clear during our divorce that college expenses were my responsibility, and I'd been counting every month until both kids were financially independent. More importantly, I was exactly 3 years and 4 months away from full retirement benefits. At 55 years and 4 months, I could walk away with my full pension, keep my health insurance, and maybe do some consulting work for fun money. The math was simple. Hold on until September 2027, and I'd be set for life. Now I was staring at unemployment at 52 in a field that treats anyone over 45 like they're typing on stone tablets. The worst part wasn't even the firing itself. It was the calculated humiliation of doing it in front of the entire company. Gerald could have called me into his office, handled it privately, let me keep some dignity. Instead, he turned it into a public execution. Mason will be taking on expanded responsibilities as our new Director of Information Technology, Gerald continued, and I watched my replacement try to look serious while probably Googling what a network switch was on his phone. He brings cutting-edge expertise in modern IT practices and will be implementing several exciting initiatives in the coming months. Cutting-edge expertise. The kid had asked me last week if our servers ran on Windows or the other one. When I said Linux, he nodded like he knew what that meant. After the meeting, I walked back to my office like a zombie. 28 years of memories crammed into a 12 by 12 room with motivational posters I'd stopped reading years ago. Photos of server installations, team building events, the Christmas party where Gerald had given me a Distinguished Service Award for keeping the lights on during the ice storm of 2014. Patricia Wells from HR was already waiting with a security guard and some cardboard boxes. She looked about as comfortable as you'd expect from someone whose job was to watch grown men pack up their careers. "I'm really sorry about this, Bill," she said, and I could tell she meant it. Patricia had been there almost as long as me. She'd probably watched a dozen good people get pushed out to make room for someone's nephew or golf buddy. "You've got 30 minutes to gather your personal items. I'll need your badge, laptop, and company phone." 30 minutes. 3 decades reduced to half an hour of stuffing desk drawers into boxes while someone watched to make sure I didn't steal the stapler. I handed over the laptop and phone right away, but when she asked for my badge, I patted my pockets and frowned. Must have left it in my car. I'll bring it back tomorrow. She made a note on her clipboard but didn't push it. Patricia knew I wasn't going anywhere with office supplies. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my badge was more than just a piece of plastic with my picture on it. See, when you've been the guy building and maintaining IT security for 28 years, you build in certain safeguards. The badge system I'd implemented had multiple redundancy layers, and the primary admin account had a 72-hour deactivation delay. I'd added that feature after a disgruntled temporary employee nearly crashed our payroll system in 2019 by immediately disabling the wrong account. It was supposed to protect the company from exactly this kind of situation. Instead, it was about to protect me. Patricia probably assumed it would handle disabling my access, meaning Mason would handle it. And Mason probably assumed his daddy's money could solve any technical problems that came up. They were both about to learn exactly how much they didn't know about the systems keeping their company running. I carried my boxes to the parking garage in 2 trips, nodding goodbye to people I'd worked with for decades. Some looked sympathetic, others just looked away. Nobody said anything because everyone understood the rules. When you're getting walked out, you're radioactive. Talking to you might suggest you're not fully supportive of management's decisions. Sitting in my car afterward, I did the math that every 52-year-old does when they suddenly find themselves unemployed. My salary had been $85,000 a year. Not bad for Cleveland, but not enough to carry mortgage payments and college expenses without steady income. I had maybe 6 months of savings if I was careful, and that was assuming nothing went wrong with the house or the car. Job hunting at my age was going to be brutal. All those job postings looking for digital natives with 5-7 years experience. Code for, we don't want anyone who remembers what computers were like before smartphones. I could probably find something eventually, but it wouldn't pay what I was making, and it definitely wouldn't come with retirement benefits. But the more I sat there, the more something else started bothering me. It wasn't just about the money or the timing. It was about the disrespect. 28 years of keeping their systems running, of being the guy they called at 2 a.m. when something broke, of building an IT infrastructure that had never had a major security breach or significant downtime. And Gerald's way of saying thank you was to humiliate me in front of 200 people so his unqualified son could play office. That's when I remembered something important. Gerald had this massive presentation scheduled for Thursday morning, 3 days away. Potential client from Detroit, some automotive parts manufacturer looking to upgrade their entire production management system. Gerald had been bragging about it for weeks, calling it a company-defining opportunity. The contract was worth $25 million over 5 years, enough to fund the company's expansion plans and probably a nice bonus for whoever closed the deal. Mason was supposed to handle the technical demonstration. The kid who didn't know Linux from lingerie was going to convince a room full of engineers that Great Lakes could handle their complex manufacturing integration. This was going to be interesting. That evening, I sat in my garage with a beer and really started thinking about what Gerald and Mason didn't understand about IT infrastructure. It's not just servers and software. It's layers upon layers of access controls, authentication protocols, and security hierarchies that took me decades to build and refine. Every system has what we call privileged escalation paths, ways for administrators to regain control if something goes wrong. I'd built those paths carefully over the years, always thinking about business continuity and disaster recovery. What happens if the primary admin gets hit by a bus? What if someone accidentally locks themselves out of critical systems? The irony was beautiful. Gerald had just created exactly the kind of scenario my security protocols were designed to handle, except now I was the disaster they needed to recover from. Tuesday morning, I drove past the office on my way to the unemployment office. Just curious, you understand. My badge was still in my wallet, and according to my own security protocols, it would remain active until Thursday morning at 9:15 a.m., exactly 72 hours after my termination went into the system. I spent Tuesday filling out job applications and updating my LinkedIn profile. Seeking new opportunities, the polite way of saying got fired by my boss's kid. By evening, I'd applied to 12 positions and gotten 3 automated rejection emails. The job market for 52-year-old IT directors was exactly as brutal as I'd expected. Wednesday afternoon, I got a call from my buddy Ross in procurement. We'd worked together for 15 years, and he was one of the few people who'd actually said goodbye when I was getting walked out. "Bill, you're not going to believe this," he said, laughing. "Mason just spent 2 hours in a meeting trying to explain our server architecture to the Detroit clients over video call. He kept talking about the cloud and digital transformation, but when they asked specific questions about load balancing and redundancy protocols, he started sweating like a confession booth. How bad was it? Put it this way, they asked if our systems could handle a 40% increase in transaction volume, and he said we'd just scale up our bandwidth. I don't think he knows what either of those words actually means. The Detroit clients were getting nervous. Good. They should be nervous about trusting their $25 million automation project to someone who thought bandwidth was something you bought by the pound. "They're still coming for the in-person demonstration tomorrow?" I asked. "Oh yeah, Gerald's putting on the full dog and pony show. Catered lunch, facility tour, the works. He's betting everything on Mason pulling this off." After hanging up, I made my decision. Not about revenge, I'm not that petty. This was about professional standards, about showing a company what happens when you throw away institutional knowledge in favor of nepotism and buzzwords. Wednesday night at 11:30 p.m., I drove back to the office. The parking lot was empty except for Charlie's security truck. Charlie Morrison had been working nights there for 8 years, and I'd helped him set up his daughter's laptop for nursing school just 2 months ago. "Working late again, Bill?" he asked when I badged in through the side entrance. "You know how it is, Charlie. Big presentation tomorrow." He waved me through without a second thought. Why wouldn't he? I'd been coming and going from that building for 28 years. My badge still worked, my face was familiar, and Charlie probably hadn't gotten the memo about my termination anyway. The server room was my second home. I could navigate it blindfolded, every rack, every cable, every blinking light. Row 7, Rack 3, the primary domain controller that handled authentication for every user account in the building. Next to it, the backup systems and network switches that formed the digital nervous system of Great Lakes Industrial Systems. I wasn't going to destroy anything. I'm not a vandal, and I'm not stupid. Destroying company property would be criminal, and I had no interest in becoming a felon over Gerald's stupidity, but I was going to teach them a lesson about the value of experience. First, I changed the primary administrator password and locked out Mason's emergency access account, the one I'd created for him 2 weeks ago when he complained about not being able to install software on his laptop. Then I modified the domain authentication settings to require manual approval for any system logins. Every employee would need to request access individually, and only someone with root administrator privileges could approve those requests. But the real masterpiece was the timing protocol I embedded in the presentation system. It was elegant, really. Everything would work perfectly until exactly 10:30 a.m. Thursday morning, right in the middle of Gerald's big pitch to the Detroit clients. Then the authentication servers would lock down tighter than Fort Knox. The beauty was in the specificity. I didn't touch the manufacturing systems or the payroll servers. This wasn't about hurting people or stopping production. This was about the presentation, the conference room where Gerald thought he could embarrass me publicly and get away with it. I also copied our complete client database, technical specifications, and the entire Detroit project proposal to a secure external drive. Not to steal anything, I'd never violate client confidentiality. But if Gerald wanted to play hardball, I needed insurance. Evidence of exactly what I'd built, what I knew, and what they were throwing away. The whole operation took me 45 minutes. By 12:30 a.m. Thursday morning, I was back home, sitting in my garage with another beer. My phone was charging on the workbench, and I'd already decided to leave it there all morning. Gerald's presentation was scheduled to start at 9:30 a.m. If my calculations were correct, they'd have exactly 1 hour of normal operation before everything went sideways. 1 hour for Mason to try explaining complex manufacturing integration systems to a room full of engineers who actually knew what they were talking about. This was going to be educational for everyone involved. Thursday morning, I was having coffee and reading The Plain Dealer at the diner across from our office building when my phone started buzzing. I'd turned it back on at 8:30 a.m. just in time for the show to begin. First call came at 9:45 a.m. Patricia from HR, probably wondering why I hadn't returned my badge yet. I let it go to voicemail. 9:52 a.m., Mason calling. Poor kid was probably starting to panic as he realized the presentation computers weren't responding properly. I let that one ring through too. 9:58 a.m. Gerald himself, the big boss, reduced to calling his fired employee for help. I almost answered just to hear the desperation in his voice, but decided to let him sweat a little longer. Through the diner window, I could see people moving around frantically in the office building across the street. Emergency meetings happening in conference rooms, someone running between floors. By 10:15 a.m., there were 3 people visible in the server room through the basement windows, probably Mason and whatever outside IT contractors they could get on short notice. At 10:25 a.m., my phone rang again. Gerald, getting persistent. This time I answered. Bill, thank God. We're having some kind of catastrophic system failure. Everything's locked up. The presentation computers, the network, even the phones are acting weird. Can you come in and help us fix this? I could hear real panic in his voice now. 28 years of smooth operations, and suddenly he was remembering exactly who had been keeping the lights on. Sorry, Gerald. I don't work there anymore, remember? You made that pretty clear on Monday. Look, I know Monday was abrupt, but we've got the Detroit clients here right now, and this is a $25 million contract. We need your expertise. That sounds like a Mason problem now. I'm sure your director of information technology can handle it. He's got all that cutting-edge expertise, right? Silence on the other end. I could practically hear him calculating how much this was going to cost him. Bill, please, we can work something out financially. And there it was, the magic words every consultant loves to hear. Well, Gerald, I'm consulting independently now. My emergency rate for system recovery is $450 per hour, with a minimum 8-hour engagement. Payment by wire transfer before I touch a single keyboard. More silence. I knew he was doing the math. $3,600 minimum, probably closer to $5,000 by the time I was done. But that was pocket change compared to losing a $25 million contract. Gerald, you still there? Fine. Whatever it takes. Just get down here. The clients are getting restless, and Mason is... He paused, probably looking at his son trying to explain to automotive engineers why none of the demonstration computers would boot up. Mason needs technical support. I finished my coffee, left a $5 tip for the waitress who'd been keeping my cup full, and walked across the street. Charlie, the security guard, looked confused when I walked through the lobby in civilian clothes instead of my usual business casual. The office was pure chaos, people standing around their computers like they'd been cursed by some digital witch. The marketing department huddled around one laptop that still had internet access, probably trying to pull up backup presentations from their personal email accounts. I found Gerald in the main conference room with 4 very serious-looking men in expensive suits, the Detroit clients. Mason was at the front of the room next to a large monitor displaying nothing but an error message that read, "Authentication server unavailable." "Gentlemen, this is Bill Patterson," Gerald said, relief flooding his voice. "He's our senior IT consultant and the architect of our entire technology infrastructure." Senior IT consultant. Yesterday I was dead weight being restructured out. Today I was a senior consultant. Amazing how quickly corporate titles can evolve. One of the Detroit executives, a gray-haired man who looked like he'd been dealing with technology problems since before computers had mice, leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Patterson, we've been waiting for 90 minutes to see a demonstration of your manufacturing integration capabilities. Are you going to be able to resolve this situation?" I looked at the error message on the screen, then at Mason, who was sweating through his designer shirt despite the air conditioning. "I'll need to assess the situation in our server room first," I said. "This appears to be an authentication cascade failure, probably triggered by someone making unauthorized changes to our security protocols." Mason went pale. He knew exactly who had been making unauthorized changes, trying to optimize things he didn't understand. "How long will the assessment take?" asked another Detroit executive, checking his Rolex. "Give me 30 minutes to identify the root cause. I should have preliminary restoration within an hour." Gerald looked like he wanted to hug me. "Whatever you need, Bill. Full access, anything." 20 minutes later, I was in the server room with Mason and 2 contractors from TechServe Solutions, the company we called when we needed extra hands for major installations. Mason was trying to explain what he'd been doing to modernize our authentication systems, but kept using buzzwords that didn't actually mean anything. "So you modified the domain controller settings?" I asked, pulling up the event logs on my laptop. "Well, I was trying to implement a more cloud-forward authentication paradigm," Mason said. which was corporate speak for I changed things I didn't understand. The tech serve guys were good, I'd worked with them before, but they were looking at my systems like archaeologists examining ancient artifacts. They understood the individual components, but they'd never seen how I'd customized everything to work together. The authentication servers are locked in emergency mode, I explained, typing commands that undid my own sabotage while making it look like complex diagnostic work. Someone triggered a security protocol that requires manual restoration of the trust relationships between domain controllers. It was all true, technically. I just didn't mention that someone was me, and the emergency mode was exactly what I'd programmed it to do. 45 minutes later, I had the systems running again. The presentation computers booted up properly, the network connections were solid, and Mason looked like he'd been granted a last-minute stay of execution. "Thank you," Gerald said when I emerged from the server room. "I don't know what we would have done without you." "Well," I said, "that's exactly what you're going to find out." The Detroit presentation went smoothly after that, though it started nearly 4 hours late. Gerald's company-defining opportunity became a masterclass in damage control, with me sitting in the back of the conference room like some kind of technical security blanket while Mason stumbled through slides about manufacturing integration. Every time the Detroit executives asked a specific question about server capacity, network redundancy, or database scalability, Mason would glance back at me with panic in his eyes. I'd nod or shake my head, and he'd try to translate my signals into sentences that sounded remotely professional. By 3:30 p.m., the Detroit team was ready to wrap up. The lead executive, introducing himself as Tom Bradley from Bradley Automotive Components, shook hands with Gerald and said they'd have a decision within 2 weeks. Translation, they'd probably spend those 2 weeks looking for a more competent vendor. After the clients left, Gerald pulled me aside. "Bill, I think we need to talk seriously about bringing you back. This whole situation has made me realize how much institutional knowledge you have. It would be unfortunate for the company to lose that permanently." Institutional knowledge. Corporate speak for, we're screwed without you, and we both know it. I'm consulting independently now, Gerald. If Great Lakes wants to contract my services, we can discuss terms. What kind of terms are we talking about? I'd had 4 hours to think about this while watching Mason sweat through his presentation. For ongoing consulting work, my standard rate is $150 per hour. For emergency calls like today, it's $450 per hour with an 8-hour minimum. For system design and major project work, we'd negotiate separate contracts. Gerald's eye twitched when I said $150 per hour. Quick math, if they needed me 20 hours a week, that was $156,000 per year, nearly double my old salary of $85,000. But they'd save money on benefits, office space, and the overhead costs of a full-time employee. And you'd be available for critical situations? Within reason. I'm not on call 24/7 anymore, Gerald, but for legitimate emergencies, yes. He agreed to the terms that afternoon. Amazing how flexible corporate budgets become when the alternative is complete system failure. The following Monday, I got my first consulting contract with Great Lakes, 6 months at 25 hours per week, $150 per hour with emergency response provisions. Gerald's signature was still wet on the paperwork when my phone rang. "Bill, it's Mason. I'm trying to update the security software on the main server, but I'm getting some kind of permission error. What exactly are you trying to install?" "Well, I downloaded this antivirus program that got great reviews online and—" "Stop. Don't install anything else. I'll be there in an hour." It took me 20 minutes to undo the damage Mason had caused trying to improve our security systems with shareware antivirus software. Then I spent 2 hours explaining to him why downloading random programs onto production servers was roughly equivalent to performing surgery with a butter knife. That became my routine. 3 days a week in the office, working on actual IT projects and strategic planning. The other days were spent fixing whatever Mason had broken while trying to optimize things during my absence. 2 months later, Gerald made Mason the marketing director. Face-saving promotion that got him away from anything involving actual technology. The kid was probably better suited for making PowerPoint presentations about synergy and paradigm shifts anyway. 6 months after that, Gerald offered me a permanent consulting contract at $175 per hour. Seemed the company had decided that institutional knowledge was worth paying for after all. The real satisfaction came a year later when I ran into Patricia Wells at the grocery store. "How's retirement treating you, Bill?" I'm not retired, Patricia. I'm busier than ever. Started my own consulting firm, Patterson Systems Integration. Got 3 major clients now, plus the ongoing work with Great Lakes. That's wonderful. You know, Gerald's been telling everyone that restructuring IT into a consulting model was part of his strategic plan all along. I nearly laughed out loud. Gerald always was good at rewriting history to make himself look smart. He says it's more cost-effective to have senior expertise on demand rather than as full-time overhead, Patricia continued. Well, he's not wrong about that, I said. My hourly rate works out to about $350,000 per year if you calculate it as full-time equivalent. But they only use me when they actually need expertise, so it probably averages around $200,000 annually. Patricia's eyes went wide. 2.5 times my old salary for working fewer hours and having complete control over my schedule. The best part isn't even the money, though. It's the respect. When I walk into that building now, I'm not just another employee Gerald can fire in an all-hands meeting. I'm a professional consultant whose expertise commands premium rates. Every conversation, every recommendation, every system I design carries weight because they're paying serious money for my opinions. Last week, I got a call from Tom Bradley at Bradley Automotive Components. Turns out they'd decided to pass on Great Lakes and were looking for an independent consultant to help them design their manufacturing integration systems from scratch. We were impressed with your technical knowledge during that presentation, he said. Even though it was a bit chaotic, it was obvious you knew what you were talking about. The Bradley contract is worth $800,000 over 18 months. Not bad for a 52-year-old who was supposedly too old for the modern workplace. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's proving that experience, competence, and institutional knowledge are worth exactly what the market will pay for them. And the market, it turns out, values those things a lot more highly than Gerald Hoffman ever did.